Hey guys, Time here, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about interfaces. Interfaces are quite useful, and they're one of the most common components in bugs, and very important to understand. So, to start off, there are four different types of interfaces. There are main interfaces, which cover the main window of the client, and these cover the bulk of the interfaces in RuneScape. There are also sidebar interfaces, such as this deposit interface that opens when you trigger the bank. It looks a lot like the inventory, but you notice the tabs are all gone. That's because that's how sidebar interfaces work. There's also chat box interfaces, which open in the chat box, as the name would imply, and they're typically used for talking to NPCs. And the last kind of interface is a tab interface, and these open when a different tab is clicked. They're very similar to sidebar interfaces, but they're very easy to switch between. So those are the four main types of interfaces. And while these interfaces all open naturally within their respective conditions, using different cheating tools, you're actually able to open any interface in any part of the client. This is useful, for example, if you wanted to access your bank while you were PKing. You obviously don't want to cover the main window with the bank while you're PKing, right? And you probably don't want to cover up your inventory. So you'd want to either force your bank in the chat box, or you would want to force it into one of your tabs, such as, for example, the quest tab, which would turn into your bank when opened. It can also be used to access more than one interface at a time. For example, if you're in a dual screen, you could force a bank window into your chat box or something and be able to do both at the same time. And lots of fun bugs can come up when mixing interfaces like that. Okay, so another thing about interfaces is they have a tendency to remember what they were last used for. And this is a concept I refer to as interface caching. Basically, if you open an interface like I did there, and then you force the interface, it'll have all the same entries that it had before. And the reason for this is when you open an interface normally, the normal way, by requesting it from the server will send it a bunch of information to fill in all the blanks that are within the interface. And this is useful for filling in your bank, filling in shop windows, whatever, when you open them up for the first time. And that's because, while certain windows may have the same interface ID, like if we open shop here, you'll see this is the default shop on this server actually has items in it, and you can't buy them from it, so that's a potential bug right there. But if you go to, let's go to Bob's Axes. You'll see we now have the axe shop window, and if we go away and force the same interface again, now it has axes in it. And of course you can still buy those too. So that's the basis for interface caching. The interesting thing is, if you force the sell interface, you would also be able to sell back to that same shop you were in, because the last shop you were in is remembered by the server. So lots of fun things you can do with interface caching. Very powerful concept. If you use the general store, for example, it's a very popular way to store items temporarily, sort of a temporary bank. Very handy for that reason. Finally, what we're going to talk about are action buttons. And action buttons are, exactly as they imply, they're a button on an interface that does something. And almost everything you interact with in RuneScape is treated as an action button. Pretty sure that even items within the bank are treated as action buttons, but don't quote me on that. Action buttons use frame 185, and they send one parameter along with this, which is a button ID. And these packets are the core of why interface forcing actually works. And that's because the server never actually validates that you have an interface open while it's handling that packet. So we're able to trigger the effects of an interface without the server ever registering it being open, which is what makes interfacing so powerful and so difficult to patch, is that you would have to recognize what interface the player is in all the time, and for certain things it's a lot easier said than done. For some things it's fairly easy, but those edge cases would make it very buggy to implement a half fix for it. So usually it's pretty available. Interface forcing works on 90% of the servers I've ever been to. Not every interface, but a good amount of them do. So yeah, that's been the tutorial on interfaces, and I hope it was handy.